Sophie Ruiz didn't mean to call a billionaire that night. She just wanted someone to help her mother breathe again. The mug hit the floor before Elena did. Porcelain shattered, hot tea bleeding into the cracks of the kitchen tile. The sound startled Sophie from her coloring book, and when she turned, her mother was on the ground, eyes open, body still. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the sink ticked as if time had the nerve to keep moving. Sophie froze for only a heartbeat. She remembered what her mother had said after their last fire drill. "If something happens to Mommy, call Uncle Ryan." She scrambled for the phone, tears already making her small hands slippery. She scrolled through recent calls, found a number she thought was his, and pressed it. "Hello," a deep voice answered. Not Ryan's. Too calm, too certain. Sophie hiccuped a sob. "My mom, she fell. She won't wake up." The man's voice sharpened instantly. "Where are you?" "Our house, over Jimmy's tools. The red door that sticks. Apartment 3B. "What city?" "Boston." A pause, the voice dropped an octave. "I'm on my way." The line went dead before Sophie could ask who he was. 15 minutes later, a black SUV slid to a stop in front of the building. It wasn't the kind of car that belonged on this street. It looked like it had driven out of a different world. Shiny, silent, expensive. The man who stepped out moved fast but steady, like he'd been trained not to panic. His name was Damian Ward, though the little girl upstairs didn't know that yet. He didn't bother to buzz the door. One push and the lock gave. He took the stairs 2 at a time until he reached the red door with peeling paint and a brass number barely hanging by a nail. He knocked once. No answer. Again, louder. "3B?" he called. Inside, a small voice answered, "Here." The door opened a crack and a pale child's face peeked through. Big brown eyes, trembling lips. The smell of burnt tea and fear floated into the hallway. Damien dropped to a knee. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You called me. I'm here." He didn't waste another second. He stepped inside and found Elena Ruiz on the floor, her skin ashen, a thin trickle of blood near her temple. She was breathing, shallow and erratic. He checked her pulse, thready but there. "Do you have any towel?" he asked. Sophie pointed mutely to a drawer. He grabbed one, pressed it gently against the wound, and looked around. The apartment was clean but worn, half the light bulbs out, paint curling near the ceiling, a drawing of a cat taped crookedly to the fridge. Everything screamed, trying her best. "Sir," Sophie whispered, voice trembling. "Are you a doctor?" "No," he said, eyes still on her mother. "But I've seen worse." He slid one arm beneath Elena's shoulders and another under her knees. "I'm taking her to the hospital." Sophie's eyes widened. "But you're not supposed to carry strangers." He almost smiled. "You called me, remember?" She hesitated, then nodded, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter. The SUV's headlights cut through the wet night. Damien drove fast, glancing at the rear-view mirror every few seconds. Elena lay in the back seat, her chest rising unevenly, Sophie's small hand gripping her sleeve. "Why didn't you call 911?" he asked. "I tried, but it didn't work," Sophie whispered. "I pressed the wrong name. I thought it was Uncle Ryan's." He frowned. "Do you remember what name you pressed?" She nodded. It said Mr. Ward. For a moment he thought he'd misheard. Mr. Ward, his private number, one that only his inner circle used. How had a 7-year-old girl found it? He didn't ask. Not yet. At Boston General, Damien carried Elena past the front desk before the clerk could object. "She needs trauma care," he said, his voice calm but impossible to argue with. Within seconds, nurses surrounded her. Sophie tried to follow, but a nurse stopped her gently. "Sweetheart, let us help your mom, okay?" Damien crouched beside her. "She's safe now. You did exactly the right thing." The girl blinked at him. "You came really fast." "I was already close," he said. It wasn't true, but she didn't need to know that. When the nurses wheeled Elena away, Damien stayed. He could have left. He didn't owe them anything. But he didn't move. Instead, he found himself sitting in a plastic chair beside a vending machine, staring at the faint red mark on his sleeve where Elena's blood had dried. He'd built companies, toppled markets, and outmaneuvered governments, but he couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him with trust instead of expectation. Sophie had called him because she believed he could help. That belief felt heavier than any contract he'd ever signed. 2 hours later, a nurse approached. "She's stable," she said. "Mild concussion, dehydration. She'll wake soon." Damien nodded. "I'll cover her bill." The nurse blinked, then recognized him. "Mr. Ward? That Mr. Ward?" He ignored the question and handed over a black card. "No press. Just make sure she gets what she needs." When he returned to the waiting area, Sophie had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, her rabbit clutched to her chest. He looked down at her and felt something unfamiliar stir, an ache that wasn't pity or guilt, but something closer to responsibility. Outside, dawn was thinning the edges of the night sky. He could have left right then and gone back to his world of boardrooms and glass towers. Instead, Damien Ward sat beside a sleeping child in a hospital waiting room, wondering why a wrong number had felt more right than anything in his life for years. When Elena opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was the ceiling. White, humming, antiseptic. The second was the little hand gripping hers, fingers sticky with dried tears. "Mom?" Sophie's voice cracked on the word. "You're awake." Elena blinked, her mind swimming back through the fog. The last thing she remembered was the kitchen spinning, the floor rushing up. Now there were IV lines, a monitor beeping gently beside her, and her daughter's tired, hopeful face above. What happened?" "You fell," Sophie said quickly. "You didn't wake up. I called Uncle Ryan, but I got it wrong. A man came instead." Elena frowned weakly. "A man?" Before Sophie could answer, the door opened. The man himself stepped in, tall, composed, with a quiet gravity that didn't fit the sterile room. A black jacket over a gray shirt, no tie. His gaze flicked briefly from the monitors to Elena's face. "Good morning," he said, voice low but warm. "How are you feeling?" Elena pushed herself slightly upright. "You're the one who helped us?" He nodded. "You fainted. Your daughter was very brave. She gave me your address, and I brought you here." Elena's cheeks flushed with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "I can't believe— Wait, how did she even reach you? I thought she tried to call my brother." Sophie piped up proudly. "I pressed Mr. Ward." Elena blinked. "Mr. Ward?" The man offered a faint, knowing smile. "Apparently, I was the wrong number." There was an awkward beat. Then, "Mr. Ward, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if—" "You don't need to thank me," he said quickly, almost uncomfortable. "You should rest." But Elena didn't let it go. "You brought us to the hospital. You paid for this, didn't you?" Her gaze darted toward the nurse's station, visible through the window. "They told me the bill's handled." Damien looked down, as though he'd been caught doing something impolite. "It wasn't much. I didn't want the paperwork to delay care." "That's more than kind." "Just decent," he replied. "That shouldn't be rare." He turned toward the window then, the light framing him sharply against the glass. Elena saw the hint of weariness in his posture, something deeper than fatigue. She studied him for a moment, curious. "You don't look like someone who answers random phone calls," she said quietly. He gave a soft laugh, surprised. "No, I suppose I don't." Then after a pause, "But your daughter sounded terrified. You don't ignore that kind of fear." Sophie looked between them, beaming. "I told him you're the best nurse ever." Elena smiled faintly. "You told him that, huh?" "I did," Sophie said proudly. "He said nurses are heroes." "Did he?" Elena said, her eyes flicking back to Damien. He nodded. "I meant it." By afternoon, the color had returned to Elena's face. A doctor confirmed it was dehydration and exhaustion, a few nights of skipped meals, too many double shifts, too much worry. She'd been trying to freelance home care work after losing her job at St. Mary's Hospital 6 months earlier. When Damien came back from making a call, he found Sophie perched at her mother's bedside, drawing him in crayon. The paper showed a stick figure man in a giant black car with big square shoulders. "That's you," Sophie announced as he approached. "See? The hero car." Damien crouched down beside her. "You gave me quite the promotion." "You came when I called," she said matter-of-factly. "That's what heroes do." He smiled at that, though the word hero landed heavier than he liked. Elena watched the exchange quietly. She didn't know who this man was exactly. He didn't move like an ordinary rescuer. There was something guarded in him, a precision that came from years of decision-making where mistakes cost millions, not moments. Finally, she asked the question that had been circling her mind. "Mr. Ward, what do you do?" He hesitated as if debating how much truth to give. "I run a few companies, mostly technology and infrastructure." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "That sounds big." He offered a small shrug. "Big doesn't always mean good." She tilted her head. "Still, not the kind of person who usually answers calls from scared little girls." That made him smile again. Real this time. Brief but human. Maybe it was a good reminder. "Of what?" He met her eyes. "That I can still do something that matters." The words hung between them, simple but heavy. When a nurse came to discharge her later that evening, Damien had already arranged transport. A private car idled outside the emergency entrance. Elena protested immediately. "You've done more than enough. I'll sleep better knowing you got home safely," he said evenly. "That's all." Sophie tugged her mother's sleeve. "Please, Mom, the hero car's back." Elena sighed, defeated, and let him guide them outside. The rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the streetlights. Damien opened the car door for them, but didn't follow. "You're not coming?" Sophie asked. "I've got a meeting," he lied gently, "but I'll check in tomorrow, all right?" She grinned. "You promise?" He hesitated, then said, "Yes, I promise." Elena looked at him one last time before getting in. "You really don't have to." "I know," he said. "Good night, Miss Ruiz." The door closed. The SUV pulled away, disappearing into the glow of downtown lights. From the back seat, Elena watched his figure shrink through the rear window, wondering why a stranger's presence felt safer than anything had in years. Damien stayed where he was long after the taillights vanished. The faint echo of Sophie's voice still lingered in his mind. "You came when I called." He didn't know it yet, but the wrong number hadn't been wrong at all. Damien Ward had spent years learning how to walk away from things that didn't belong to him. But that night, as he sat in his penthouse office staring at the city lights, he realized he couldn't walk away from a voice. A child's trembling voice asking for help. The image wouldn't leave him. Sophie's tiny hand gripping her mother's sleeve, the flicker of fluorescent light on the hospital tile, the trust in her eyes. He'd saved lives before, at least on paper. He'd written checks that built hospitals, sponsored research, funded countless public programs. Yet none of it had felt real until that phone call. He turned his chair toward the wall of glass. Below, the city pulsed. Brilliant, restless, indifferent. He took a sip of cold coffee and reopened the file he'd pulled from his foundation's archives. St. Maron's Medical Grant, Procurement Division. The name had caught his eye because Elena Ruiz had mentioned it offhand in the hospital. A small hospital that had burned through 3 rounds of funding with suspiciously little to show for it. Equipment contracts signed and voided, reports edited after submission, oversight letters unanswered. Most people wouldn't have looked twice, but Damien's gut told him something had been buried there. And Elena's exhaustion, the kind that came from fighting battles alone, made sense now. He opened another window, sending a message to his data analyst. "Jonas, pull everything you can on St. Maron's procurement between 2020-2023. Contracts, subvendors, board minutes. I want to know where every dollar went," Jonas replied a minute later. "That's a lot of dirt, boss. You expecting to find bones?" "Worse," Damien typed back. "I'm expecting to find ghosts." The next morning, he showed up at Elena's building. She nearly dropped her grocery bag when she saw him on the landing. Same black SUV, same calm voice. "Mr. Ward," she said, surprised. "You weren't kidding about checking in." He smiled faintly. "I keep promises. How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Still embarrassed." "Don't be," he said. "You did nothing wrong, and Sophie saved you." At the mention of her daughter, Elena's expression softened. "She's been telling everyone her hero in a big car rescued us. The landlord asked if I started dating a movie star." Damien laughed quietly, the sound rusty, unused. "I'm not much of a hero." "Try convincing her of that." He hesitated. "Actually, I came for more than a wellness check." Her smile faded a little. "What kind of more?" He held up a slim file folder. "You used to work at St. Maron's, didn't you?" The air shifted. Elena's eyes darkened with something between fear and fatigue. Yes, until they made sure I couldn't. I read about their funding issues, he said carefully, and the procurement irregularities. You mentioned something in the hospital. Faulty equipment? She folded her arms, defensive but trembling. Why are you looking into that? Because my foundation was one of their donors, Damien said quietly. And if they used my money to kill people instead of helping them, I need to know. Her lips parted. You think they killed people? He looked her straight in the eyes. I think they covered up something that did. They sat at her kitchen table, the same cracked tile beneath their feet, a pot of weak coffee between them. Sophie was at school, mercifully unaware of the weight in the room. Elena spoke first. There was a boy, Connor, 7 years old, heart defect. We had new telemetry monitors from a vendor St. Marin's swore was top tier. They failed mid-shift. The alert didn't trigger when his pulse dropped. We lost him before we even knew he was crashing. Her voice caught, but she didn't cry. She had cried all her tears long ago. I reported it, she continued, filed everything by protocol. But the next week, the incident log disappeared. The data files were rewritten. When I confronted my supervisor, she said compliance already reviewed it and closed the case. 2 weeks later, I was suspended for disruptive conduct. Damien's jaw tightened. You had proof? I did. I made copies. But then my apartment was broken into. They didn't take the TV or jewelry, just my laptop. I filed a police report. Nothing came of it. Do you still have anything? She got up, disappeared into her bedroom, and returned with a worn manila envelope. Inside were printouts, emails, screenshots, patient telemetry logs with timestamps that didn't align. The kind of evidence people risked careers to keep. She slid it across the table. I was going to send this to a journalist, but who would believe a nurse over a hospital board? Damien flipped through the pages, his pulse steady but his mind racing. He recognized one of the signatures, Andrew Kalin, CFO, the same Kalin who'd overseen grants at several of Damien's partner institutions. He set the folder down. I believe you, he said. She blinked. Why? Because I've seen this before, not in hospitals, in tech, in development, in anywhere someone thinks profit can outrun consequence. Elena exhaled shakily. So what happens now? He stood, the decision already formed in the silence between heartbeats. Now I do what I should have done years ago. We find out exactly how deep this goes. You're not part of that world, she said. They'll eat you alive. He smiled faintly, but there was steel behind it. They already did once. I just learned to taste the metal. She watched him leave, a mixture of fear and reluctant hope flickering across her face. When the door closed, she looked down at the empty coffee cup and whispered to herself, please don't let this destroy him too. Outside, Damien slid into the SUV and called Jonas. Start a trace on a man named Andrew Kalin, he said. Find out who's protecting him. And Jonas, be careful. This isn't just about missing money anymore. Jonas hesitated. Understood, boss. Should I ask what it's about then? Damien's eyes hardened as he stared at the hospital logo stamped on one of Elena's documents. No, he said. You'll see soon enough. The city lights flickered red and gold across the windshield as he drove off. Somewhere between guilt and justice, a new story had begun, born from a wrong number and a little girl's voice that still echoed in his chest. Jonas called just after dawn. His voice was sharper than usual, awake in the way only adrenaline could cause. I found something, he said, and you're not going to like it. Damien was already in motion, coffee half poured, laptop open on the table beside a stack of documents. Send it. Already did. Westwood Medical Fund, your fund, channeled $6.2 million to a shell vendor called Medcore Integrated Holdings. Guess who signed off? Damien's chest tightened. Andrew Kalin. Bingo. Jonas exhaled. They funneled the cash through Medcore, which then supplied hospitals with the budget telemetry monitors. They're defective by design, cheaper internal sensors. Kalin's been pocketing the difference through a secondary entity offshore. Damien pinched the bridge of his nose. You have receipts? I've got emails, invoices, and payment chains. But it gets worse. One of the documents includes a falsified compliance certificate signed by a nurse supervisor. Name redacted. The redaction code matches St. Marin's system. I think it's Elena's old signature. For a moment, the room blurred around him. He forged her signature? Looks that way. It's their insurance. If the monitors failed, blame the nurse who approved them. Damien's silence was ice. Meet me in 2 hours. Elena was already awake when he arrived. She looked surprised to see him at her door again, but not entirely unprepared. There was a wary steadiness in her eyes now, the calm of someone who had stopped expecting kindness, but recognized purpose when she saw it. I made pancakes, she said flatly. Sophie's at school. You want coffee? Please, he said, stepping inside. She poured without a word. When she finally spoke, it wasn't small talk. You found something? He nodded. Kaylin forged your signature. They used your name to authorize the faulty monitors. Her grip on the mug tightened, but she didn't spill a drop. I knew it, she whispered. They couldn't just fire me. They had to erase me. Damien slid a folder across the table. Jonas traced the payments. The same contract that funded those devices went through my company's charitable branch. That means, legally, I'm complicit. Elena stared at him, unblinking. You? He met her gaze evenly. I signed off on the fund. I trusted Kaylin. My name's on the same paper as yours. For a long time, she said nothing. Then quietly, what are you going to do? Fix it, he said simply. All of it. She gave a bitter laugh. You think the system lets people fix things? I tried. They made me the villain. I'm not a nurse, Damien said, but I've built enough systems to know where the seams are. Elena looked at him for a long time. Finally, she asked, why do you care? You could walk away. You're rich enough to buy silence. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked around the small apartment, the patched wallpaper, the uneven shelves, the quiet proof of endurance. Because I've spent years pretending to make the world better from 30 floors up, and somehow a 7-year-old with a cracked phone made me realize I've been fixing the wrong problems. That disarmed her more than any apology could have. She turned her eyes away. You sound like someone who used to believe in things. I'm trying to again, he said softly. By noon, they were in Damien's office downtown. The skyline stretched like a cathedral of glass, but the room felt colder than the street below. Jonas had printed everything: invoices, bank trails, internal memos. He'd even highlighted the forged compliance letter. This is the nail, Jonas said, tapping the page. It ties Kaylin to MedCorp and implicates the hospital board. He's been laundering contract payments for years. Elena leaned forward. If we take this public, they'll say it's fake. They'll say I doctored it. Then we don't go public yet, Damien said. We go internal first. Quiet audit. Force a suspension before he can bury the trail. Jonas nodded. Charles can move the motion through the board if you back it. He owes you favors. Damien crossed his arms. He owes me truth. Elena looked between them. You make it sound simple. It's not, Damien said, but it's possible. He turned to Jonas. Start drafting the audit request. Include only the financial irregularities for now. Leave out Elena's name until we have independent verification on the signature. Jonas raised an eyebrow. You're protecting her. I'm protecting the evidence, Damien said. If she goes down, so does the proof. Elena's voice was low but firm. Don't protect me. Use me. I've been through hell already. If my name gets them to look, then use it. Damien looked at her, impressed by her fire but unwilling to risk her safety. You'll have your moment, Elena, but not until we're ready. Her jaw tightened. You sound like one of them. He shook his head. No, I sound like someone who's learned how they work. The room fell silent. Then Jonas spoke again. If we do this, it's war. Kaylin has lawyers, politicians, press contacts. He won't just step down. He'll burn anything that can hurt him. Damien looked out the window. Then we make sure the truth burns brighter. That evening, as Elena left the office, she paused by the elevator and looked back. Damien stood at the glass, the city's glow painting him in amber. For a fleeting moment, she saw the man beneath the money, haunted, determined, maybe even good. When the elevator doors closed, Damien exhaled slowly. The reflection staring back at him looked unfamiliar. Not the mogul from magazine covers, but a man who had finally picked a side. He picked up his phone. "Charles," he said when the line connected, "we need to talk about Andrew Kalin, and I need you to keep this off the books." On the other end, there was a long pause. Then quietly, "What have you done now, Damien?" He looked out at the city lights, where truth and consequence blurred like rain on glass. "Something right, I hope," he said. The meeting with Charles Whitmore took place in a quiet corner of a restaurant that pretended to be casual, but cost more than most people's rent. Damien didn't notice the marble floors or the soft piano music. He noticed the way Charles stirred his espresso without tasting it, a habit he had when he knew something dangerous was coming. "You've been off the grid lately," Charles said finally. "That's never a good sign." Damien leaned forward, sliding a folder across the table. "Kalin's laundering funds through shell vendors tied to hospital contracts. He's been covering up faulty medical equipment that's killed people. I have the audit trail." Charles raised an eyebrow. "You're accusing the CFO of criminal negligence under your own foundation's umbrella? That's not just brave. That's suicide." "I'm not accusing him," Damien said. "I'm proving it." Charles flipped through the first few pages, his eyes narrowing as he read. "You realize if this comes out, every partner institution tied to Westwood Health Fund will demand a full review. You'll be under the microscope too." "I'm already under it," Damien replied. "I just stopped pretending not to see the light." Charles set the papers down, fingers steepled. "And the woman? Elena Ruiz, she's part of this?" "She's the one they scapegoated," Damien said. "Kalin forged her signature to bury a child's death." "Then she's a liability," Charles said flatly. Damien's tone turned cold. "She's a witness." Charles studied him for a long time, then softer. "You've changed. The old you would have made this disappear quietly, paid it off, shifted the board, called it a restructure." "The old me built this," Damien said. "Time to unbuild it." For once, Charles didn't argue. He simply nodded. "You'll need allies. I'll call an internal audit vote. You'll have to speak before the board." "Do it," Damien said. "And Charles, keep her name out of it for now." "Done." Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window while the city flickered below, the folder Damien had given her open across the table. Every page was a wound. Connor's name appeared again and again, redacted, then reappearing in archived copies Jonas had restored. She read the email from her old supervisor, the one that had ended her career. "Elena Ruiz is no longer with St. Marin's. Please route all compliance inquiries to administration." The coldness of it still stung. Her phone buzzed. Damien's name flashed across the screen. "They'll vote tomorrow morning. I'll call after." She stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Be careful." Then she added after a pause, "They don't forgive men who grow a conscience." He replied, "Then it's a good thing I stopped asking for forgiveness." The next morning, the boardroom at Westwood Tower smelled like polished wood and quiet menace. Damien stood at the head of the long table, the skyline stretching behind him like a witness. Kalin sat near the end, immaculate suit, expression polite, eyes like blades. Charles began the session formally. "We're here to review irregularities in the procurement division's disbursement process. Mr. Ward has requested an internal audit authorization." Kalin's voice was smooth. "With respect, I find this redundant. Every grant we've processed has cleared compliance and federal inspection." Damien opened a folder. "Then you won't mind explaining why the same vendor billed St. Marin's Hospital 3 times for telemetry units that were never delivered." Kalin smiled, the kind of smile men wear when they've rehearsed their denials. "Hospitals often delay installation schedules. Equipment is shipped in stages. That's standard." "Then explain this," Damien said, sliding a document forward, the forged authorization letter with Elena's name. "You used a nurse's signature to falsify compliance approval. She was fired months before the date on this record." The room went still. Even Charles stopped breathing. Kalin's mask cracked just slightly. "You can't prove that's not her signature." "Actually," Damien said, voice even, "we can." He nodded to Jonas, who stepped forward and placed 2 documents side by side, one from Elena's employment file, another from the forged letter. "Forensic analysis shows different pen pressure, stroke variance, and loop formation. It's an artificial replication. You used a digital overlay. Kalen's calm began to falter. You've overstepped, Ward. You're violating internal confidentiality protocols. And you violated human ones. Damien cut in. A child is dead because you turned a grant into a profit stream. Kalen stood abruptly. You think you can play the hero? You'll go down with me. The fund, the partners, the press, all of it will burn. Damien met his fury with silence. Then he said quietly, maybe, but at least this time I'll burn for the truth. Charles cleared his throat. All in favor of an independent audit. Hands rose slowly but decisively. Everyone except Kalen's. It's unanimous, Charles said. Effective immediately. Mr. Kalen is suspended pending investigation. Kalen's eyes found Damien's. You think this ends here? He hissed. You're a fool if you believe they'll protect you once this goes public. I'm not asking for protection, Damien said. I'm asking for accountability. Security entered moments later. Kalen didn't fight. He straightened his tie, smirked, and walked out with the quiet arrogance of a man convinced the world would circle back to him eventually. When the door closed, the silence felt heavier than victory. Charles looked at Damien. You just made yourself the most dangerous man in this building. Good, Damien said. Now they'll finally start listening. That evening, he went back to East Boston. Elena opened the door before he knocked, eyes searching his face for the verdict. It's done, he said. He's out. The audit's approved. For a second, she didn't speak. Then quietly, You actually did it. He nodded. We did it. She looked past him toward the SUV idling on the curb, then back at him. What happens now? Now we let the truth work, he said. And if it doesn't, we make it louder. Elena smiled faintly, but there was exhaustion in it. You don't look like a man who celebrates wins. Maybe because this one came too late, he said. She studied him. Connor's mother will sleep better tonight. That's not nothing. No, Damien said, glancing toward the faint glow of the city beyond. It's not nothing, but it's not enough either. And as he walked back to the car, he realized he didn't just want justice anymore. He wanted redemption, the kind that couldn't be written off in a report. The headlines came the next morning, just as Damien predicted. CFO suspended in Westwood Health Fund scandal. Anonymous audit uncovers procurement irregularities. No names, no leaks, no mention of Elena Ruiz. But anyone who had ever shaken hands with Andrew Kalen knew the story wasn't over. By mid-afternoon, Damien's phone was a war zone of calls from board members, legal advisors, and journalists. He silenced them all. The truth had escaped containment, and Kalen would not go quietly. Jonas was the first to breach the noise. We've got movement, he said over the line. Kalen's attorney just filed a whistleblower complaint against you. Claims you fabricated evidence to push him out. Damien stood by the window of his office, watching the reflection of his own stillness in the glass. That was fast, he murmured. He had it ready, Jonas said. My guess? He knew this day would come. Then we were right about him, Damien said. And now he's scared. Scared men bite hardest. Then let him bite, Damien said. We've already got the truth on record. Jonas hesitated. You do realize if this turns into a federal investigation, they'll subpoena everyone connected to the file, including Ruiz. That name snapped Damien's composure, if only for a second. Not if I can help it. Elena wasn't surprised when she saw the story. She'd been bracing for it since Damien left her apartment 2 nights ago. What did surprise her, though, was the call from the hospital's compliance officer that afternoon. Elena, the voice said, clipped but uneasy, a federal review team might contact you. You were listed on a procurement document under audit. Listed? She repeated. You mean forged? A pause. The investigators will decide that. When the line disconnected, Elena sat in silence. Sophie was humming in the next room, coloring at the kitchen table. Outside, the sirens were distant, almost polite. Then came the knock. She opened the door to find Damien standing there again. Same black SUV at the curb, same expression that carried more fatigue than fear. You've seen the news of some, he said. I have. They'll come for you, he said. Not because you're guilty, because you're the easiest link to break. I already know, she said quietly. They called. He hesitated, then stepped inside. I'll get you counsel. Someone who knows how to handle this. Don't waste your money, she said. They won't believe me any more than they did before. This time they will. She turned away, running her hands through her hair. Why are you doing this? You could vanish tomorrow and no one would blame you. You've got everything to lose. Damien leaned against the counter, the city's gray light cutting across his face. Because you and your daughter called the wrong number, and I decided to answer. Elena looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment all the fear in her body turned to anger. This isn't about saving me, she said. It's about saving yourself. You're trying to rewrite your name on the right side of the story. He didn't argue, he just said, maybe. But if I can make things right for the people they hurt along the way, does my reason matter? Her breath left her in a rush, part disbelief, part surrender. You're impossible, she whispered. I've been called worse. That evening, Jonas met Damien in the garage under Westwood Tower. It was the kind of meeting that didn't belong on a calendar. I traced Kalen's fallback accounts, Jonas said, handing over a flash drive. He's moving money through a Vermont hospice foundation. On paper, it's clean. But look closer. The same directors sit on multiple boards connected to him. Damien pocketed the drive. Send a copy to Charles. Already did. What about Elena? She's clean, Jonas said, but the feds will question her. The forged signature puts her at the center. Damien's jaw tightened. Then I'll testify first. Jonas frowned. You sure? You're not exactly expendable. I am, Damien said. I just stopped pretending otherwise. Jonas gave him a look, a mixture of respect and concern. You're playing martyr again. Just remember, dead men don't fix systems. Neither do cowards, Damien replied. 2 days later, the investigators called. Damien arrived with Charles in a binder thick enough to break a table. The conference room smelled like old coffee and fresh suspicion. Mr. Ward, the lead agent began, you're aware that these accusations could extend beyond Mr. Kalen. Financial oversight failures fall under your direct authority. I'm aware, Damien said, and that's why I'm here. To show you the proof that he used our structure to commit fraud, and to make it clear that I won't hide behind plausible deniability. The agent studied him. That's an uncommon position for someone in your role. Maybe that's the problem, Damien said. They went through the evidence line by line. When the forged authorization letter appeared, Damien stopped them. That signature belongs to a nurse named Elena Ruiz, he said. She reported equipment failures before her dismissal. Her name was used without consent. You'll find her employment file in the appendices. Verify the handwriting. It's not hers. The agent nodded. We'll need her testimony. You'll have it, Damien said, but you'll protect her. That's not how this works, the agent replied. It is now, Damien said, voice like steel. That night, he called Elena. She didn't answer. A minute later, a text appeared. They came. I told the truth, he typed back. Good. That's all that matters. Her reply came slowly. No. What matters is what happens after. Damien stared at the screen. Outside, the city was silent for once. He didn't know whether that silence meant peace or the calm before another storm. But he knew this much. Every lie he'd ever ignored was finally burning away, and what remained wasn't the billionaire or the savior. It was just a man who'd stopped running. The federal investigators didn't come with flashing lights or cuffs, just notebooks, questions, and the kind of watchful silence that could strip a life bare without raising a voice. Elena sat across from them at her kitchen table, Sophie's drawing taped behind her like a fragile kind of shield. The agents' suits were dark, their pens moving quickly. She answered everything: how the monitors failed, when the reports vanished, who told her to stop asking questions. Every word cost her a little more of her composure, but she didn't flinch. One of them, a woman with gray streaks in her hair, paused near the end. You understand, Ms. Ruiz, this statement will be part of a public record if charges proceed. It could expose you to retaliation. Elena met her gaze. Then I'll stand by it publicly, too. The woman nodded almost approvingly. Brave choice. No, Elena said. Necessary one. When they finally left, she sank into her chair, exhausted. Outside, the city pulsed as if nothing had changed, but she knew something had. Somewhere, a line had been drawn, and she was standing on the side that finally felt right. Damien was waiting 2 blocks away, parked where he could see her window but not be seen. He'd promised not to interfere, but he couldn't stay away. Watching her talk to the agents had made him realize something. Courage looked nothing like he'd imagined. It wasn't loud or cinematic. It was quiet, trembling, and immovable. When she stepped outside an hour later, he got out of the car. "You didn't have to wait," she said, pulling her coat tighter. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." Elena studied his face. "You're expecting bad news." "I'm expecting consequences," he admitted. "Kalen's lawyers filed a motion accusing me of obstruction. They're claiming I doctored the ledger files." Her eyes narrowed. "Can they prove it?" "No," he said, "but they don't have to. They just have to make enough noise." She tilted her head, the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of her lips. "You're finally learning what it's like to be the little guy." He actually laughed at that. "Fair point." Her smile faded. "So what happens now?" "I go in front of the grand jury next week," he said. "They'll ask if I knew about the corruption before I acted. They'll want to know if I looked the other way." "And did you?" His jaw tightened. "Yes. Maybe not this exact crime, but others like it. When you build something that big, you stop looking at every brick. That's how rot grows." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Then you tell them that. The truth doesn't need to be clean. It just needs to be whole." He looked at her, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't sympathy, it was recognition. Both of them had lived too long with truths half buried under survival. At the Westwood offices, chaos had become the new normal. The board fractured into factions, some wanting to protect the brand, others ready to purge the leadership entirely. Charles Whitmore stood between them, the reluctant peacekeeper. When Damien arrived, Charles pulled him aside. "You're walking into a storm," he said. "Kalen's team is leaking documents to make it look like you funded the defective monitors yourself." "I expected that," Damien said. "They need a villain with a better headline." Charles sighed. "You could step back for now. Let me handle this. Distance yourself from the fallout." "No," Damien said. "Distance is what started this." Charles studied him, then gave a slow nod. "You really are changing." "I'm just done being comfortable," Damien said. "Comfort's the quietest kind of corruption." Jonas found him later in the underground garage, laptop in hand. "You'll want to see this," he said, pulling up an encrypted folder. "What is it?" "A backup of Kalen's private drive," Jonas said. He didn't scrub it completely. "There's an audio log, boardroom meeting, dated 2 months before the boy's death." Damien listened. The recording was grainy but clear enough. Kalen's voice came through first. "We'll replace the sensors in the next quarter. The failure rate's within acceptable range." Then another voice, a woman's. "What if someone dies before then?" Kalen again. "That's what PR's for." Damien closed the laptop. His knuckles went white. "Get me a copy." Jonas nodded. "Already sent to the investigators anonymously?" For the first time in weeks, Damien smiled. A tired, dangerous smile. "You just signed Kalen's obituary." That night he called Elena. "They have it," he said. "The recording," his voice admitting everything. For a long moment she didn't speak. When she did, her tone was quiet but steady. "So it's over." "Almost," he said. "He'll try to make one last deal, but this time the truth is louder." She exhaled. "And you? What happens to you when it's done?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But for the first time, I'm not afraid to find out." There was a pause, then she said, "Sophie asked if she can draw you another picture. She says heroes deserve more than one." He smiled, voice softening. "Tell her I'll earn it first." "You already did," Elena said. "You just don't know it yet." When the call ended, Damien stayed by the window of his apartment, watching the lights of Boston shimmer across the harbor. The city looked almost clean from up here, but he knew better. The world never scrubbed itself without blood and work. He reached for the file on his desk, the first printout Jonas had ever given him, the one labeled Connor Report. He stared at the boy's name, at the numbers that had once been just data, and whispered, "You'll be more than a file now." Outside, thunder rolled low over the water, and for the first time in years, Damien Ward didn't feel like running from the storm. He felt ready to walk straight into it. The grand jury hearing felt less like justice and more like exposure. The fluorescent lights in the courtroom buzzed faintly, cutting through the air, thick with quiet tension. Damien sat at the witness table, a man who once commanded boardrooms, now reduced to an ordinary voice under oath. "Mr. Ward," the lead prosecutor began, flipping open a file thick with evidence. "You claim that your CFO, Andrew Kalin, acted independently in authorizing the defective equipment purchases. Is that correct?" Damien met the man's gaze. "Not independently," he said. "He acted under a system I helped build, a system that rewarded efficiency over scrutiny. I gave him room to move, and he used it to cover his tracks. That's on me, too." The room shifted. Reporters scribbled, pens tapping furiously. The prosecutor arched a brow. "So you're admitting negligence?" "I'm admitting I stopped asking questions when the answers were inconvenient." The quiet that followed wasn't judgmental. It was surprised. Few men in Damien's position had ever said those words aloud. The prosecutor leaned forward. "And what made you start asking again?" He thought of Sophie's trembling voice, of Elena standing by her kitchen window, her strength disguised as weariness. "A phone call," he said simply. When it was over, the corridor outside the courtroom felt like another world. Muted, strange, unreal. Charles was waiting near the exit, his expression unreadable. "You did well," Charles said, walking beside him. "Too well, maybe. The press will love you for it." "I didn't do it for them," Damien replied. "I know," Charles said. "That's what makes it dangerous." They stepped out into the cold daylight, cameras flashing from across the street. Damien didn't stop for questions. He didn't need to explain himself anymore. But as he reached his car, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Ward." "Funny hearing you sound human, Damien." The voice was oily, practiced. "Kalin." Damien exhaled slowly. "You shouldn't be calling me." "I'm calling because you don't understand what you've started," Kalin said. "The feds won't stop at me. They'll dig through every fund, every donation. You'll lose everything you built." "I already lost it," Damien said. "I just didn't know it yet." Kalin laughed softly. "Still playing martyr, I see. Tell your nurse friend to watch herself. She thinks truth is armor, but I've seen armor shatter." The line went dead. Damien stood still, the phone heavy in his hand. The city's noise seemed to dim around him, leaving only that single threat echoing in his mind. Elena found out the same night, through a knock on her door. Not from the press or the agents, but from a courier. A plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. Her and Sophie walking home from school, taken from across the street. Her pulse spiked. She turned the photo over. Nothing written, just the silent message of power. "We see you." She didn't call Damien right away. Instead, she checked the locks twice, made Sophie's dinner, read her a bedtime story, and waited until her daughter was asleep. Only then did she text him. "He's watching us." Damien didn't reply with words. 10 minutes later, headlights glowed outside her window. When she opened the door, he was already on the steps. "You should have called sooner," he said, voice low. "I didn't want to scare Sophie." "She doesn't need to know," he said, stepping past her and scanning the small apartment automatically. The corners, the windows, the shadows. "You'll stay at a hotel tonight." "I'm not running." "It's not running," he said. "It's staying alive." She crossed her arms. "He's bluffing." Damien turned, meeting her eyes. "Men like Kalin don't bluff. They warn once." Their silence stretched, filled with the hum of the refrigerator and the faint drip of a leaking faucet. Finally, she said, "You can't protect me from everything." "No," he said, "but I can try to make sure you don't pay for my choices. You didn't make this mess alone." "Doesn't matter," he said. "The world doesn't punish everyone equally. It'll come for you first." For a long moment, neither moved. Then she said quietly, "Sophie's safe with my neighbor tonight. I'll pack a bag." He nodded. They drove in silence through the sleeping city, streetlights carving slow amber streaks across the windshield. Damien glanced at her once, but she was staring out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. "When this ends," she said suddenly, "what happens to you?" He hesitated. "If I'm lucky, I'll testify, sign over the fund, and fade out quietly." And if you're not lucky, he smiled faintly, then I'll find out whether redemption still counts when nobody's watching. Elena turned toward him. You already did enough. Not yet, he said. Kalen's not finished. He'll try to cut a deal. He'll trade your name for immunity if he can. Her throat tightened. Then you stop him. I will. They reached the hotel near the harbor. Damien walked her to the lobby, past the glass doors that reflected them side by side. Two people who shouldn't have ever crossed paths but did, and changed everything. At the elevator, Elena paused. Thank you. He looked at her, the words too small for what they'd endured. You don't have to thank me. I'm not, she said softly. I'm saying goodbye, in case this is the last time we get to say it. He wanted to tell her it wasn't, that he'd keep her safe no matter what. But lies felt like betrayal now, even when they came from hope. So he only said, Good night, Elena. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed slowly, and for the first time, Damien Ward realized how terrifying it felt to care about someone who wasn't replaceable. Outside, his phone buzzed again. A text from Jonas. Kalen's lawyers requested a private meeting. He's ready to make a deal. Damien typed back, Tell them I'll be there. Then he slipped his hands into his coat pockets, walked out into the cold harbor air, and whispered to no one, If this ends tonight, let it end clean. The meeting with Kalen's lawyers was held in a private suite downtown, the kind of place where bad men still believed money could buy silence. Damien arrived alone, despite Charles's insistence on sending a legal escort. He wanted no buffer between himself and the man who had turned his charity into a crime scene. Inside, two attorneys waited at a long oak table, papers neatly stacked, expressions perfectly rehearsed. But Kalen wasn't there, not yet. Mr. Ward, one of the lawyers greeted him, a thin man with a voice that sounded like glass being swept off marble. Our client appreciates your willingness to meet. He believes an understanding can be reached. Damien sat. There's nothing to understand. He's finished. The second lawyer, a woman with eyes sharp enough to cut, smiled faintly. He disagrees. Mr. Kalen intends to provide federal investigators with context. He's prepared to name additional individuals responsible for compliance failures, including yourself, unless you're willing to, how shall we put it, mediate the narrative. Damien's jaw tightened. You're threatening me with the truth I already gave them. Not quite, she said. We're offering a path that doesn't destroy everyone. If you agree to issue a joint statement clarifying that all oversight lapses were collective misunderstandings, Kalen will... The door opened. Kalen entered. No suit this time. Just an expensive coat over the hollow arrogance of a man cornered. That's enough legal theater, he said, waving his lawyers off. Damien and I can talk like adults. The lawyers hesitated, then left, the sound of the closing door sealing the room in an uneasy quiet. Kalen poured himself a drink from the minibar. You always like grand gestures. You could have buried this quietly, but no, you had to play savior. I'm not saving anyone, Damien said. Just stopping you. Kalen chuckled. Stopping me from what? From doing what every board does. Cutting corners, maximizing yield, turning good intentions into workable margins? You think the world runs on morality? It runs on men like me keeping men like you rich enough to pretend you're clean. Damien stood slowly. Connor was 7 years old. Kalen looked up, his smirk faltering just a fraction. Don't feed me sentimentality. You knew what philanthropy really is. A mask for the rot. You just didn't want to look at the teeth beneath it. Damien took a step closer. Maybe. But I'm not looking away anymore. Kalen sipped his drink, eyes cold. You'll regret this. You think they'll thank you? The feds don't want redemption. They want scalps. Yours is worth more than mine. I'll take that risk. Kalen smiled then, a strange, pitying smile. You're still chasing penance. But penance doesn't change what's broken in men like us. It just delays the collapse. He turned toward the window, the skyline reflected in the glass like a graveyard of ambition. You won't win, Damien. Even if I fall, the system stays standing. Damien stared at the back of his head, at the man who had once been his mirror, and said quietly, Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it doesn't. He left without looking back. 2 days later, the audio file Jonas had leaked hit the press. Kalen's recorded words, That's what PR's for, spread across every network by noon. By evening, his lawyers had withdrawn representation. The board released a statement condemning him, and federal charges followed before sunrise. The victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like silence. Heavy, Kalen's lawyers expected an audience. Damien gave them silence instead. The meeting took place in a private conference suite on the 31st floor of a neutral law office downtown. There were no cameras, no reporters, just glass walls, muted light, and tension that hummed like static. Kalen was already there when Damien walked in, sitting behind the table as if it still belonged to him. The man's suit was immaculate, but his face had thinned, the edges worn down by weeks of scrutiny. "Well," Kalen said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, "the prodigal philanthropist himself. Come to make peace?" Damien took the seat opposite him. "You asked for this meeting. Talk." The lawyer beside Kalen cleared his throat. "Mr. Ward, my client is prepared to offer full cooperation with investigators in exchange for immunity. He's willing to name other parties involved in the procurement scandal, vendors, board members, subcontractors. That could protect your foundation's assets." Damien didn't blink. "And in exchange?" "Public exoneration," Kalen said smoothly. "A joint statement. We both acknowledge systemic failures without assigning individual blame. You get to keep your reputation intact. I get to keep my freedom." Damien leaned back in his chair, eyes steady. "You forged a nurse's name on a compliance document that let a child die. You made my money a weapon, and you think I'll protect you from consequence?" Kalen's smile wavered. "Don't pretend you're innocent. You built this empire on shortcuts and plausible deniability." "I just followed your lead." Damien's voice lowered. "You don't get to hide behind my guilt," the lawyer interjected quickly. "Mr. Ward, if this goes to trial, both of you risk indictment. The jury won't care who's more guilty. They'll see two men, rich and arrogant, fighting over blame while a boy's name is buried under red tape." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Damien stood slowly. "You're right about one thing. They'll see two men, but only one of us still remembers that boy's name." He turned to leave, but Kalen's voice followed him, cold and furious. "You think this will end with a confession? You'll lose everything. The fund, your companies, your so-called redemption story. When I fall, I'll take you down with me." Damien didn't look back. "You already did." By the next morning, Kalen's deal had collapsed. Jonas confirmed it first, forwarding a message from the federal office. Negotiations terminated. Defendant withdrew cooperation. Damien stared at the email for a long time, then closed his laptop. He'd expected as much. Kalen would rather burn than bend. A knock came at his office door. It was Charles. He looked older than usual, the lines around his eyes deeper. "They're saying Kalen's preparing to flee. Offshore accounts resurfacing, private jet on standby. They'll move to detain him by tonight." Damien nodded. "Let them." Charles hesitated. "And you? Once he's gone, the board will turn on you. They'll need another name to blame." "I know." "You could walk away quietly," Charles said. "Start over somewhere else. No one would stop you." Damien looked out at the skyline, the same skyline he'd built half of. "That's exactly why I won't." Elena didn't hear about Kalen's attempted escape until the news broke that evening. CFO arrested at Logan Airport amid corruption scandal. The photo showed him in handcuffs, head lowered, surrounded by flashing lights. The headlines called it closure. It didn't feel like that to her. She called Damien. He answered on the second ring. "It's over," she said quietly. "Almost," he replied. "You sound disappointed." "No," he said after a moment. "Just tired." "I don't think there's a word for what we are," she said. "Tired isn't big enough." He smiled faintly at her honesty. "You're probably right." There was a pause, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then Elena asked, "What happens to the foundation?" "I'm dissolving it," Damien said. "Half the assets will go into a medical relief trust under independent oversight. The rest will cover restitution claims for the families. And you? I'll testify again, then disappear." She exhaled. "You think disappearing is redemption?" "No," he said, "but maybe it's mercy." 3 weeks later, the final hearing took place. The courtroom was smaller this time, emptier. Damien testified one last time, Not as a billionaire or a benefactor, but as a man finally willing to stand in his own shadow. When it ended, the judge's gavel came down softly, as if even justice felt weary. Outside, reporters called his name. He ignored them, walking through the drizzle toward the waiting car. But halfway there, he saw Elena and Sophie standing by the steps, an umbrella between them. Sophie waved. "You did it!" He smiled, something quiet, something real. "We did." Elena stepped closer. "They'll write stories about you now. Then maybe they'll finally write about the people who deserve them more." He nodded toward her. "About you." She shook her head. "I'm not a story." "You are," he said softly. "You just didn't ask to be one." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "So where will you go?" He shrugged lightly. "Anywhere that needs rebuilding." "Everywhere does," she said. He smiled. "Then I'll start small." Sophie tugged Elena's sleeve. "Can we go home now?" Elena smiled faintly. "Yeah, sweetheart. Home." Damien watched them go until they disappeared into the crowd. For a long time he stood there, letting the rain wash the city's noise from his thoughts. The wrong number, the wrong world, the wrong man. Somehow all of it had led here. He looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "Thank you, Sophie," though she couldn't hear him. Then he turned toward the harbor, where the water caught the faint reflection of morning light, unforgiving, honest, and new.